Welcome, friends and neighbors. This is our third and final event commemorating the 250th anniversary of our meeting house. And it's seen a lot of change. We are grateful to those who came before us and to everyone who's here today. We have some great speakers, and they will connect our Quaker past and present and our Quaker witness and worship in this meeting house. So now, the first item of the day, I'm honored to introduce Milana Homan-Hefner from the office of Congressman Herb Conaway.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Milana Homan-Hefner, and I'm really honored to be with you all here today. And I wanted to extend a congratulations to the 250th anniversary. So I would like to read to you a letter that the Congressman has written in your honor. Dear friends, it is my pleasure to recognize the Mount Holly Friends Meeting House and all those who have preserved its legacy for 250 years. Built in 1775, the Meeting House is the oldest public building in the Mount Holly Historic District. It has served as a temporary home for the New Jersey legislature during the Revolutionary War and has remained a gathering place for the community. The Meeting House gathers people from all backgrounds for weekly meetings, student programming, musical performances, and historical education. These contributions reflect the Quaker tradition of service and selflessness. On behalf of New Jersey's 3rd Congressional District, I congratulate Mount Holly's friends of this historic milestone and thank them for their enduring presence in our community. Sincerely, Dr. Herb Conaway.
Well, I'm so delighted to welcome and introduce Eileen Flanagan. She's a Quaker writer, author, social activist, and presenter from Chestnut Hill meeting in Pennsylvania. And she's written 4 books. Her latest is Coming Around, and we have it here in the other room, so take a look at that. Thank you for being here.
Oh, very good.
Thank you. Big Al is helping to promote me as well as Mimi. I appreciate that. Good morning. It's good to be here with you all. About a month ago, I was speaking to a group of Quakers concerned with environmental issues and from all over the country. And they had asked Bill McKibben to send a video message. Bill is a well-known internationally climate activist and author. And he sent this very sweet video where he mentioned Quakers' long tradition of being involved in good causes, from social justice to environmental protection. And that comment sparked a conversation among the friends there about, well, what is it about our faith that has made that true? Not that we've always been right on every issue, because we haven't, but disproportionately compared to, especially compared to other white Christians, and Quakerism grew out of the Christian tradition, we come out looking like we were on the right side of a lot of things. And why is that? And that question got me thinking, I think, to prepare for today in a way, of what is it? So for those of you who might not know a lot about Quakerism, we were founded in the 1600s in England at a time of great social chaos, at a time where people were questioning whether they wanted a king. There might be some parallels to today. I'm glad someone got that right from the go. And there were actually a lot of religions that grew out of that time. In addition to the Quakers, there were ranters and Shakers and Muggletonians, which I think is really funny for any Harry Potter fans, that there was a real group called the Muggletonians, experimenting with other ways of living their faith and feeling that there was something in the way the Church of England and the Catholic Church were expressing Christianity that felt out of sync with how they read the gospel. And so there were a few radical ideas that were born at that time that continue to be part of Quakerism. One is the idea that there is that of God in every person. If we have a theology, that's the closest thing to it, even though we are very broad theologically. And that was radical at the time. It was one of the things that got Quakers in trouble for saying that there was that of God in every person, even if they weren't Christian, even if they were female, right? But that was a core part of the founding. Now, Quakers aren't unique in saying things like that. There's actually a lot of religious traditions that have some idea about our oneness with the divine. But I think because Quakers don't have a lot of theology, say, compared to other churches, that idea has taken a more central place. Another thing that was radical was worshiping in silence without a minister or a priest. To say that anyone can connect to the divine directly, that we don't need an ordained intermediary, was also a radical idea. And that anyone could speak, which continues to be true in our meetings. Children are allowed to speak if they feel so moved, or anyone. You don't have to be a long-time member. And the third thing is that in those early years, Quakers really came under a lot of oppression. And although that isn't part of our theology, it's part of our history that I think set up a kind of sympathy for other people who were experiencing state oppression. 11,000 Quakers were thrown in jail in the 1600s in England, and 400 died in prison. And so there was something in that experience. And the one other thing I would say about worshiping in silence, it was funny, right after I had this thought, I ran into Rufus Jones' quote, a famous Quaker from 100 years ago, who said that there's something that's sitting in silence that kind of makes room for the conscience, or for spirit, however you think of it, that makes it easier for us to feel challenged by the issues of our day if we're not just being told what to believe, but we really have to sit in the silence and listen inwardly. So what I'm going to talk about today is how Quaker history might inform us today. What does it have to offer, whether we're Quakers or not Quakers? I think there are some valuable lessons. Some of them are encouraging lessons, some of them are cautionary lessons. But I think that for a faith that was born in tumultuous times, there's a lot to be gleaned. I'll say I'm not a historian, I'm an activist and a writer, and I'm definitely not an expert in New Jersey history, although I find this great article online that I might quote once in a while about New Jersey Quakers back in the day. But mostly I am interested in the broad strokes of history and the lessons we can glean from it. The first lesson I want to lift up is the idea that if you live in a society where a lot of things are wrong, God might call you to not cooperate with the things you think are wrong. I'm curious how many people have heard the term non-cooperation. Okay, some folks. That's getting a lot more well-known these days. A lot of groups that are talking about resisting kingship in our times are talking about non-cooperation. So a few of the ways that played out in the 1600s, first of all, Quakers kept worshiping the way they believed, even when they were told not to, both in and in the American colonies. And that was one of the trouble. They were told not to do something, and they thought it was right, so they kept doing it. Including Mary Dyer, famously, who was hung in New England for continuing to preach after she had been ordered not to. Mary committed a double violation in Puritan terms. She was a Quaker, but she was also a woman. And it was forbidden for women to preach and forbidden for people to listen to women preachers. And they, sometimes when people engage in non-cooperation, they get a lot of misinformation about them. So I was fascinated to learn that the Puritans said any woman who listened to Mary Dyer or any other woman preach would have devil babies, which I thought it was like a fascinating example of trying to discredit someone who's speaking truth, right? So there's a lesson in there for today when you hear people talking smack about people who are trying to speak truth, to maybe question it. I mean, today it would have an AI picture with it, right? Other examples of non-cooperation, early Friends refused to pay tithes to the Church of England. They recognized that it's hard to go after the king directly, but any king relies on a lot of other institutions supporting him. In this case, the Church of England was kind of giving theological justification to the monarchy, and it was an obligation for people to pay tithes, so the Quakers refused. It was one of the things that got them thrown in jail. There are many, many other examples through history. Participating in the Underground Railroad was a way of saying we're not going to cooperate with a thing that we think is wrong. Alice Paul was a New Jersey Quaker who played a leading role in the fight for women's suffrage. She stood in front of the White House back before that was like a common thing to do. Women with her refused to move. When they were arrested, they protested the deplorable prison conditions by going on hunger strike, which was part of building the pressure for votes for women. And the last thing I'll say on this point is that there's something inherent about a person willing to risk for convictions that helps to move other people, right? We saw that in the civil rights movement, right? That people, John Lewis and others, walked across the bridge even though they knew the police were waiting for them. And in Quaker history, there have been a number of times where people felt their conviction so strongly. Mary Dyer knew what might happen if she went back and continued preaching, that it's the risk itself sometimes that moves other people. And that's a thing I think we haven't talked about a lot. As someone who trains activists, I understand the impulse to say, how can we make this less risky? And I think it's really important that people discern their own risk and understand that we're not all at equal risk. But to understand that some of the stories we tell from history, it was that willingness to take a risk for one's convictions that actually had the biggest impact. So I have 4 more points after non-cooperation, but I want to pause for a moment and ask you to turn to a neighbor and reflect on what does that lesson have to say to our times. Are you seeing any examples of and not every example of non-cooperation has to be risky. I know I just went hard on that. But where are people refusing to cooperate today with things that they think are wrong today? So find a neighbor, and if you can find someone you don't know well, so much the better. And I'm just going to give a few minutes each to reflect on that. And you might have to get up and move. You might have to stand up, friends. Great. Thank you, friends. I would love to hear just a few examples of what people talked about. How does this history of refusing to comply? And I just gave a few examples. You know, there's also refusing to join the military and things like that. What are some examples today of ways that people are not cooperating with things they think are wrong? And just put up your hand if you want to share a point or two. A point. Go ahead.
I don't do much, so I couldn't think of anything directly except one thing came to mind was not voting for someone I disagree with. No matter what the pressure is.
Okay.
not supporting them. And also, I haven't experienced it personally, but on a national level and sometimes local level, there's a lot going around about people who might be in the country without documentation. I would not cooperate by giving any information about such a person to any authorities.
Great. So I'm not sure, did everybody hear that? Our vote is one way we get to show our convictions, but also not cooperating if people ask for information. That's going to be especially important if you're a college administrator or a teacher or other positions, because ICE is sometimes violating spaces to try to snatch people. Go ahead.
Being mindful of how I spend my dollars.
Okay, how do you spend your dollars?
But also, we're talking, but doing the research behind it, because sometimes you'll hear a little blurb about, they're boycotting something, and you find out it's not, But doing the research and just being mindful of not spending my money where they're not supporting the Black community or LGBTQ or whatever, those things.
Great. So making mindful choices with our money is a great example, and that's something that also has its roots in Quaker history too, right? When Quakers kind of became part of the abolition movement, there were friends, John Woolman is especially well known, we'll hear about him later, in terms of, are you going to buy the cotton that was grown by enslaved people? Are you going to use sugar, that was grown by enslaved people? Today, I just want to acknowledge it's so complicated because, where did our clothes come from? All that. And so I want to make a kind of a distinction between two kinds of choices. One kind of choice is about my values, right? And that famous Woolman quote about looking for the seeds of war in our own possessions. Right, a kind of principled, I'm going to try when I can to buy these things over these things. There's another kind of boycott which is deliberately to build political power or to take a stand on a particular issue. I think the tithing against the Church of England was in that category, and I also think so was the boycott of Disney. So I'll just take a moment. For people maybe heard the headline of that story, but a few things about it that feel really important. One was the Trump appointee to be head of the FCC said on a podcast that they wanted to punish ABC for having Jimmy Kimmel as a comedy host after he made a comment they didn't like. So on the podcast, a government official said, we're going to censor. That's basically and it was very flagrant. And it was part of the reason that got such a reaction. There's been a lot of censorship, but it's not always flagrant. And this was flagrant. The second thing is that people started posting online that they were going to protest Disney because Disney owns ABC, who had suspended Jimmy Kimmel. And organizers saw it and realized Disney was persuadable. So sometimes we boycott a company, I know there are friends who boycott Amazon, but they're not under the illusion that that's going to change Amazon. Or a lot of friends don't want to invest their money in weapons, but they're not under the illusion that that's going to change the weapons company. That's different than what happened with Jimmy Kimmel, because 1.7 million people canceled their Disney subscriptions within a few days. I don't think that even includes me, because it took me 3 days to figure out how to cancel Hulu, right? But you know what happened when millions of people did that, and Disney customers and actors and directors started speaking up, including the union industry? Disney's stock price went down by $5 billion. And guess what? They changed their position on that issue. So I want to highlight that because I think a strength of Quakers is this idea that we want to live our values. I'm not sure we're always good at acting quickly when other people start a thing that's effective. So I want to lift that up as a possibility, that canceling millions of people are doing it to take a stand on free speech is something that's in our wheelhouse, but it won't necessarily be a Quaker-initiated thing. Right, thank you for lifting that up. How about a few more from your conversations? Go ahead.
Well, resisting certain things affect different populations, like the freedmen's, the people who are descendants of enslaved people. They don't have many rights against,
Great, thank you.
people being removed because they're losing a lot of the things that they had in their communities. And so a lot of us, as y'all know, a lot of the freedmen's, people descended of the freedmen's, like me, I'm a descendant of the freedmen's, Cherokee, Chippewa, Black, from all of the people. We're not against the government removing people right now. And I just wanted to put that out because I don't want him to get confused.
Yeah.
Because we're most affected in the inner cities, like in Bushgate, New Jersey, and Camden, New Jersey, and Philadelphia, and South Philadelphia, and Strawberry Man, and in Germantown, in certain areas, and North Philly, and then even in Burlington City. We have a population of people that came and, even social service can't help the regular people who the Quakers help, like my family from Timbuktu, Murray family, and other families. I was born right here in Raleigh, 1980, so I just want to put a little something out there to say that a lot of the things with the resistance, we appreciate the Quakers for everything they do and they've done historically in Germantown and all throughout. Right now, with the removal, us in a real inner city, it's very hard when you wake up and don't know anybody in your neighborhood. You don't know anybody. Like, you go to Starbucks, it's just a lot going on. And I think everybody are working together. Like, I work with different organizations as a 501c3 from Camden, Burlington County, all the way to Philadelphia. And I'm licensed in Philly, 501c3. And I assist people with legal documents, title reports, stuff.
Yeah.
I have people coming to me who don't speak English, who own the real estate and historical towns. I said, wow, how did y'all do that? And I lived in Williamsburg, Burlington County. I lived in Philadelphia. I lived in wow. So there's a lot going on with even real estate and certain things that I'm just backing up from it and myself and people trying to heal and stay like calm through all of this. But I see the effects of what was going on that I didn't know that was causing disparity. And I'm seeing a lot of people of different nationalities as well, which is, their skin is deteriorating, and I'm like, where did this come from?
Wow.
This is not a drug that I'm familiar with in my neighborhood. Just those type of things when you're speaking, I'm like, it's a lot of effects since the migration that really have people disintegrate outside, falling to pieces.
Thank you.
That's affected me because I take my child with public transportation to come here. He's from West Philadelphia, Blanchard section.
Thank you. So part of what I want to lift up about that a lot of issues are a lot of issues are complicated, and there is a tendency, I think, for definitely white Americans talk about immigration in ways that assume that our immigration experience is what is the whole story of America, right? That phrase, we're a country of immigrants, is very problematic. And so I appreciate you bringing some complexity into the stands that Quakers are grappling with today at a time where many of us are disturbed by the way the government is being deployed against one community. I'll just point out that in my book, Common Ground, I don't talk about this, but I do talk about how power holders play communities against each other. It's straight out of the authoritarian playbook to pit people against each other, and I think it's something for us all to be kind of on the lookout for in this time, because this presidency is very good at that. How about one or two more comments from your conversations, and then I'm going to go on. Go ahead, one and then two.
And I'll be really short. And so, from our conversation, I think we differentiated between resistance and non-cooperation, right? And so sometimes it's hard to see what non-cooperation looks like, and it's clear to see what resistance looks like. And so, and it really got me to thinking as someone who is I call myself an HQ, an honorary Quaker. And this is my meeting house of choice. And then as someone who is at MID, and that's Minister in Discernment with the United Church of Christ. And so what will be my witness, and in what ways can I non-conform and still be in a system where conformity is like mandated?
Yeah.
And so, and that is through the message. And so re-centering faith and the word of truth on economics and on self-determination becomes a really good way to not participate, particularly in some of these social systems that keep you in the cycle of dependency, is to empower people for employment, to empower people for entrepreneurship. And so you can choose to participate in the systems that are designed to keep you in the struggle, or you can learn the ways of true freedom and liberation and then participate in another kind of system. So,
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Let's hear one more comment.
My father was a conscientious objector during the First World War and went to Fort Dix.
Can you hold the microphone up for people?
My father was a conscientious objector and went to Fort Dix during the beginning of the First World War.
Thank you. Yeah, there's lots to tease out about all the things that people raised. But one other thing I'll just say is that just looking at my own monthly meeting in Northwest Philadelphia, there are several people who work for, and I think this relates to your point, work for institutions that are the president is trying to co-opt, right? They work at universities, or they work directly for government, or business, or media. And I think one of the things friends might consider at this time is how are we spiritually supporting people? Because you started by saying centering faith. To see what am I led to do? Am I led, I have a friend who works for the government, and he's been asking all year, am I led to quit? Am I led to do things that will get me fired? Am I led to keep my head down and try and do good in the role that I have, right? That's a serious discernment question, and I think a lot of Quakers who I visited with are like, what are we as a community all going to do together? And maybe you will discern a thing, but I think we really need to start with that. How are we listening to Spirit and supporting people who are facing these kinds of dilemmas as a kind of bottom line thing? A few other lessons from Quaker history. I'll kind of mention 2 and 3 together. Number 2 is solidarity. I mentioned that because so many of us were thrown in jail in the early years, I think that's part of the Quaker history of trying to be in solidarity with people who are suffering. And we haven't always been the kind of allies we like to look back on, right? We haven't always played that role well. But sometimes we have. I'll say my own family is Irish American, and when I left the Catholic Church and after going to a Quaker high school decided to become a Quaker, my mother was horrified. I joined a religion founded in England. She didn't like me listening to the Beatles because, the English did so many bad things in Ireland. But her one-liner was, well, at least the Quakers fed the Irish during the famine. And for people who don't know that history, there was a potato famine, but the reason that it killed at least 1.5 million people is that was basically greed. The greed of landlords taking so much of people's lands that potatoes were the only thing that people could grow to sustain themselves. And so when there was a potato blight, it had a disproportionate impact because of economic inequality. And there were other religious groups that came and offered food aid to the Irish, but they all required people to convert to get the food. It was called taking the soup, which was a really shameful thing for the Irish. You would kind of look down on someone who took the soup and converted. But the Quakers didn't do that. They just gave people food aid without asking them to convert. And 150 years later, almost, that made a difference to my mother. I just was talking to an American Quaker who spent time in Belfast in Northern Ireland, you know, the site of this great violent conflict over a series of decades, and there's still the residual violence. And she said there was one time when she was in a car of people and they were stopped by paramilitary people on the road with guns and asked who they were and where they were going. And they said, well, we're Quakers, we're going to the Quaker house. And the guy in charge said, let them go, they fed our people during the famine, right? So that history has a reverberation that I think is important for us to remember. Similarly, go ahead.
Modern times, you know, I needed a commercial kitchen, and I went to the Quaker Meat House in High Street, signed up, and they helped me. I helped Philadelphia feed brothers.
That's great.
It's still, I actually did it.
Yeah, there's in North Philadelphia, Ujima Friends continue to give out food aid every month.
Because I realized who they were from when you read the plaques and Philly. Oh, wow.
Yeah, thank you. So another example that I think I've been thinking about a lot is Germany. My own meeting was founded by some of the same people who founded AFSC, and so we had a lot of direct connection to the project at the end of World War I, where English and American Quakers fed Germans because that war was so devastating. And then when the Nazis were rising, and after Kristallnacht, the kind of one of the turning points in violence against Jews, 3 American Quakers felt led to go to Germany to basically negotiate with the Nazis if they could bring aid to the Jewish community. And they believed that they had a special opportunity to do that because of their history of feeding the Germans. And indeed, do you want to correct me?
No, I just wanted to add that we had a member of our meeting, Tessa Cadbury, was one of the people that went to, I think it was Prague, and led Jewish children and other children of refugees to take trains to head towards England. And that was Tessa Cadbury, and she did that several times.
Thank you. Yeah, I've been curious about this history, which I didn't know much about. And when there was this presentation in my meeting, I learned that there was a Quaker in Germany who kept a journal, and that her husband had been clerk of the yearly meeting, and that he was sent to Buchenwald concentration camp, kind of as punishment for German Quakers helping Jews get out of Germany. Also, another example of non-cooperation, they were ordered not to buy from Jewish stores. Everybody who wasn't Jewish was ordered not to buy from Jewish merchants. And they said in I think it was Berlin Quakers, that they were going to continue to do that. The other thing I learned, 2 other pieces in reading that journal. One was that there were, of course, afraid, who did cooperate and who were conscripted into the German army because saying no was really, really risky. And I think it's important as we lift up our Quaker heroes to recognize that in any era, some people did brave things and some people didn't. And that's just the human condition. And it's important for us to not over-identify with one half of that. The other part of that story that stayed with me was this clerk who was sent to Buchenwald was not killed, but he was in solitary for a really long time. And when he got out, one of the guards asked him, so, what are you in for? And he said, well, I'm in for being a Quaker. And he said, oh, the Quakers, my mother always told us that's who fed us when we were children. So then that guard kind of looked out for him in the concentration camp because of that history. So another example of just remembering that what we do is remembered long, long after us. The flip side of that is also true. In the early colonial years, Quakers were extremely profited from enslavement and from the displacement of indigenous people. And I was speaking to someone before that they were a little surprised that didn't come up more in the last 2 sessions. I wonder if there's anyone in the meeting has anything you want to share about the history of Quakers in this area that I might not know. And you've talked twice, which is great, but They didn't? Okay, go ahead.
I grew up going to that church. I was born in, but I knew that the Quakers helped the family that I grew up around.
Oh, okay.
Was from right here.
Great.
The Quakers helped.
All right, thank you. So you're lifting up another positive thing. That's great. I wanted to make a little space for things that, the other side of the history. Go ahead.
So when you look at Burlington history, the Kent and the Shield, you look at Burlington Meeting, it was instrumental in a lot of the things that happened as far as, what was the word, non-compliance?
Non-compliance or non-cooperation.
So when you look at Lenape, Burlington was instrumental in befriending Lenape. The Dutch, and I think it was the Swedes, tried to enslave the Lenape. So you've had that relationship with the Lenape. You've had the relationship in Burlington with the African American community throughout the year. During this time of the year, I usually reenact Hill, who was a famous Quaker out of Burlington. If you look at the A.M.E. Zion Church in Burlington, it was helped by the Quakers. So when you look at the Quakers, you look at their participation, you'll see that there was a lot of participation that came out of Burlington County as a whole. But I'll cover later the flip side of things because there's that, as the late great Paul Harvey used to say, the rest of the story. And I'll cover that later.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, we're going to hear about William Bowen, right? If I'm saying his name right. Yeah, just to say that many of those things that we're proud of today were preceded by, Quaker enslavement, and that it was a process. One of the Quaker concepts that I think is very helpful is continuing revelation. The idea that we might not get it right immediately, but if we keep listening to Spirit, we can learn more and we can change. And I think that's a hopeful thing for human beings to remember, that change is a possibility. Alice Paul, who I mentioned, who led the women's suffrage direct action wing, was incredibly brave. There's a lot to learn from her. One of the things to learn from her is that she did not fight for the rights of black and brown women, just white women, right? So both things are true in some of these stories, and I think it's a moment to just hold that both things are true. I sometimes speak to white people who have gone so far in like the only history they want to talk about is all the stuff we're ashamed of. And I think it's important to hold it in proportion, because what I notice when people do that is that they're then afraid to do anything, because doing anything I might do it wrong. And I think part of our tradition is that we try and listen to Spirit, and when we get it wrong, we try to change course. So I would encourage people to kind of hold both. There's one more idea I want to share that was articulated best, I think, by Dr. King, but I think it captures something of the history of Quaker activism. Dr. King has this quote about love and power and how we need both. I'm curious how many people are familiar with this quote on love and power? A few people. It's one of the themes of the book, Common Ground, and it's very applicable to climate change and lots of other issues, I think. Dr. King was speaking in 1967 on the 10th anniversary of the founding of his organization, the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. And it's this remarkable speech called "Where Do We Go From Here?", which was later turned into a book. And he starts by acknowledging all the progress that he made, all the things the civil rights movement accomplished in legislation, in empowerment, in starting to challenge people's ideas. But then he acknowledges all the things they had not yet solved in 1967. And he says, the problem is we don't have enough power. And he says, sometimes people of faith don't like talking about power. And he's talking to a big room full of ministers. That we're taught to think about God's power and not our own power. And he says, but that's kind of fuzzy philosophy. He says, we got to get this thing right. And the example he gives is like an auto worker union that collectively develops enough power to push the auto company to do something it didn't want to do. And the quote that just stays with me and feels so apt for these times is, power without love is reckless and abusive. Power without love is reckless and abusive. And love without power is sentimental and anemic. So when I first heard this quote, I had been going to a lot of peace vigils, standing on a corner with a sign in silence, and feeling sentimental and anemic and not having the language for that. And feeling that there was a way in which the Quakers in my community were protesting the invasion of Iraq in a way that showed what we believed, but didn't do a thing to stop the war, right? And even my daughter, in my earlier book, Renewable, I tell the story of going to a peace vigil. My daughter was like 5 or 6, and she looked up at me and said, "Mom, this is not going to change George Bush's mind. Could we go get ice cream?" Right? And it was hard to argue with that. This was like a small group of people standing in a circle, right? And it was through meeting this group that I work with now called Quaker Action Team that I learned that actually part of the Quaker tradition is doing what King called us to. It is trying to see that of God in everyone, including the people doing bad stuff, whether they're in our midst or our elected officials or whatever. Having a kind of love for humanity that motivates us to change, but also affects how we talk to decision makers. But not doing it in a sentimental and anemic way, doing it in a way that could actually make a difference, to actually stand in the way. So I think that's part of when non-cooperation is most powerful, is when it comes from that place, whether it's the civil rights movement or Gandhi or Quakers or many, many other people around the world who, grounded in love of their community, but also a broader love, stand up and stand in the way. So I'm going to tell 2 quick stories. I'll tell one story and then open it up to questions, because I know there's a lot on the program today. I learned about this part of Quaker tradition really by joining a group called Quaker Action Team. I'm curious how many people have heard of Equate? Some. So Equate really grew out of this at Philadelphia Yearly Meetings Annual Gathering. George Lakey was he was one of several speakers talking about climate change and issues. And George said, George, by the way, is a longtime practitioner of non-cooperation. His first arrest was in the civil rights movement in Chester. He's 88 now. George also was part of a group that sailed to Vietnam to deliver medical aid when the US Navy and the South Vietnamese Navy were both trying to stop them. So if you see the movie about his life, they're delivering aid, they're doing solidarity in a way that was extremely dangerous in relationship with the Buddhist community. So I think that's another that's another key to continuing revelation. Make sure you're not just listening to your inner voice, that you're also listening to the people who you're trying to help. But anyway, so George was part of many well-known direct actions. And what he said to Philadelphia Yearly Meeting was, if we're really serious that climate change is going to be catastrophic, shouldn't we try the kinds of strategies that have actually worked historically? And that really landed in the room. A small group of people met afterward to see, well, what could we do to build love and power in the climate movement? And so this little group, Quaker Action Team, decided that our mission is to use nonviolent direct action. So sometimes civil disobedience, but other times other ways of nonviolently standing up for what we believe. And to do it for a just and sustainable economy. And so we have mostly pressured corporations profiting from climate destruction. And so originally PNC Bank was our first campaign. PNC bragged about their Quaker roots, but was one of the biggest financiers of mountaintop removal coal mining, blowing up mountains to get hard to reach coal, which is bad for the earth, bad for the climate, really bad for the people who live near those mountains, who have high rates of cancer and birth defects. And we won that campaign. We showed up 125 times over 5 years. Very often, one of our most common tactics was going into a bank lobby and sitting down and having meeting for worship in the lobby. So one of the things we learned is that, like, if you just shout at people, that can get you thrown out of the bank too. But sitting down and worshiping, freaks them out. They don't know what to do with you. And we actually heard that through the grapevine from some environmental advocates, that it's like they don't know what to do with you. You're so bold, but also not fitting the stereotype that they could dismiss easily. Our current campaign is against Vanguard, the biggest asset manager in the world, which makes them also one of the biggest, I think they are now the biggest investors in fossil fuels, because they manage other people's money and put it into coal, oil, and gas. The book that Mimi mentioned and that Al held up, that I have here somewhere, Common Ground, is the story of me visiting, thank you, Big Al. It's what I learned from visiting a lot of frontline communities, so Black, Brown, Indigenous communities resisting fossil fuel and other polluting industries. It also includes some Equate stories, but when I came home from the travels, right when we were starting the Vanguard campaign, I started looking up the places that I had visited in Louisiana, on the Navajo Nation, in northern Minnesota, and Ojibwe territory. It turned out that every one of the companies doing bad stuff in the stories in the book, Vanguard was one of the biggest investors. So it was very meaningful for me as a way of showing solidarity with those communities to make those connections and to ask Vanguard to change some of its policies. They could ask for an indigenous rights policy, and that would change the way corporations relate to a lot of communities if they actually had to get the consent of people before they started putting a pipeline through their territory, for example. So that's the last chapter of the book, is a Quaker trying to apply lessons that I learned from all these other communities in my travels. And I think that it relates to all the things we've been talking about today, figuring about what are we called to do in this moment when there are so many problems, and how do we stand up today, knowing that we stand on our history, which is I think, inspiring and imperfect, right? And to hold both of those. So I'm going to pause and just see if there are any questions, and then I'm going to read one little part to close at the very end. But especially people who haven't talked yet, is there anybody who wants to raise their hand and offer a question or a comment?
In our conversation earlier, talking about non-cooperation, my friend Jamar here said that if he saw someone being bullied, he would try to stop the bullier.
That's great, thank you. I hope you don't mind being lifted up publicly, Jamar. It's in your blood, good. We have one right here.
Could you help me understand, there was a situation that happened a couple of years ago, and because I know you're involved in the environmental movement, could you help me understand the duality of the problem? On one hand, you have people who want to build windmills on the coast. On the other hand, you have people who, like myself, fish and saw the whales come up. And it became very confusing as to which party was actually for the environment and for the betterment of the New Jersey coastline, because I've never seen whales come up. I fish all the time. I've never seen any on the beach until they started these windmills. And so I understand the thing about wanting renewable energy, but was the cost worth it?
Yeah.
And how do you decipher who's right and who's wrong?
Wow, that is such a great question. Thank you. One of the themes of the book, the subtitle is How the Crisis of the Earth is Saving Us from Our Illusion of Separation, which is a little bit of a mouthful. But that was really a spiritual message that came to me about realizing the interconnectedness of everything. And so the way that relates is that I've come to the conclusion that the new technologies, whether it's wind or solar or other things that people are coming up with, it's not about this technology is right and good. It's about, are we applying this technology in a way that honors the interconnectedness of all life, right? So I'll give an example. I know more about solar than I do about wind. The great thing about solar is we can get energy from the sun, and nobody has a monopoly on the sun. So it has the potential to be, and the same is true of the wind, it has the potential to be way more democratic than fossil fuels. People have the mineral rights to that stuff and want to charge as much money as possible, right? So there is a potential in solar and wind, but there's still a way of thinking in our current economic system that's just about profit. And so with solar, there are places where they're felling trees or felling forests or taking over farmland to build solar in big arrays that are profiting a few people. I don't think that's really what we're supposed to be learning at this moment in human history. I think that the crisis of the earth isn't just about climate change. It's also about the inequality around pollution, it's about other species. And so one of the positive examples in the book on the Navajo Nation, there were young people from the Navajo, also known as the Dene tribe, and the Hopi tribe, and that's two groups that have been pitted against each other. And these young people formed together a group called the Black Mesa Water Coalition. And they were pushing to end coal on the Navajo Nation, which really ended up like hurting their water and all kinds of things, and also providing a lot of jobs. So it was one of those complicated issues, right? Where it's not just one side's totally right. And so after the first big coal operation shut down, they realized they needed to start working on building the alternative. And so they started this group called Native Renewables that did small-scale solar, so it wasn't displacing wildlife. They would do it in a way that made electricity available to people who had not had electricity at all because the West bypassed them when they were interested in politicians were interested in providing electricity to Vegas and Los Angeles, not the Navajo Nation. And they hired local people and trained them to do the jobs. So to me, that's a great example of the new technology being better for the climate. Thanks you guys for coming. Being better for the climate and also better for other species and for humans and not just for profit. And so I have to believe that there's some way to apply those ideas to wind, but I don't know as much about that. But I think there is this danger in this moment of changing energy that it'll just replicate some of the things from the old system, that profit is what we care about more than anything else. So I do believe that times of crisis are times when we can sort of change how we do things, and that's one of the changes that I hope we'll move toward. Okay, one more, and then I know there's a lot on the agenda.
Thank you. A lot of instances where people do bad things, I'm just using that as a broad term, throughout history are due to people not really caring, or they're trying to make a profit, or that kind of thing. But there are also a lot of instances where people actually think they're actively doing a very good thing, and it turns out they were doing the exact opposite of that. And in some cases even, there's basically no way to fully undo the damage, at least not in their lifetime. And I'm just wondering if you have any advice for how do you approach people with that?
Yeah, thank you. Well, I think the Quaker-run boarding schools for Indigenous people are a great example of that. Great as an example, horrible as an experience. And in many of those situations, I think the sin of arrogance is exacerbated by isolation from other people's points of view. So I would say, especially if you're doing something where you think you're in solidarity with other people, make sure you're listening to those people and what they want. Yeah, I think a lot comes from, you're right that some bad things come out of ill will, but I think ego really gets us in trouble, And I'll just share one last thing before I read the conclusion. Do people know Neonu Span? She's a Quaker of African descent who leads programs such as Beyond Diversity 101 at Pendle Hill. There's going to be one in the new year. She loves Venn diagrams. And after attending one of her sessions, there was a conversation that kind of got me thinking about what are the motivations of white people doing this work. And so I drew my own Venn diagram of 2 circles, and one circle is things I can do that I think make me look like a good white person. And then the other circle is things I can do that I think actually fight racism. And they're not the same. There's an overlap. So like a quick example was part of what inspired this. I had a conversation with a Republican family member talking about racism, and I felt like it was the first time I actually made a little progress in this conversation with this relative. And it was a quiet, in the corner conversation at a family gathering. And soon after that, I noticed another white friend posting on Facebook about, well, I had a conversation with a white person and this is what I told them. And I was like, if I did that, that would totally undo any progress I made. Like, that is not the same motivation of, so that's where spiritual practices come in to me, that can be helpful in questioning ourselves and recognizing that our tradition has a lot of methods for us to challenge each other when we're off course. Doesn't mean we'll suddenly be perfect, But I think listening to other people, having friends question us, and having spiritual practices to challenge our own ego are, I think, the three suggestions I would make in regard to that. So one of the questions I often get is about hope. And so I'm just going to end with the last two paragraphs of the book. One of the people I mentioned, do people know Daniel Hunter? Is a friend also of both African and European descent. He lives in Cinnaminson, and he is doing a lot of writing and teaching nationally about non-cooperation, among other things. I interviewed him for the book about what he was noticing about how the climate movement was navigating racial differences within the movement. But at the end, I asked him this question, so I'm going to end with that. I often remember something Daniel Hunter said near the end of our conversation about navigating race. I asked him whether he felt hopeful about the state of the climate movement. In response, he offered a story. Just the day before, he was canoeing on the Delaware River with his then 2-year-old daughter, and they capsized. I grabbed my daughter. She was all right, so we began swimming to shore, he recalled. Although they were in a harbor, the waters were choppy. There was a moment when I worried that we weren't going to get to shore because we just weren't getting there fast enough. Fear was setting in. I felt my own chest tightened as I listened. This was how many of us felt about our journey toward a life-sustaining civilization, one of the terms I use in the book for what we were talking about, a way of doing things that respects all life. We just weren't getting there fast enough, and our children's lives were at stake. Daniel said he realized that worrying about the outcome wasn't helpful and wouldn't change his actions anyway. I heard it as a moment of letting go of fear. There's nothing to do, he said. I'm going to swim to shore, he told himself. That was it, he said with a laugh as I watched. That's how I feel in terms of where we are. He added that one of the things he's learned from climate colleagues in the global south is that they are not burdened by the mythology common in US movies and novels, where an individual hero saves the universe against all odds. He said it has helped him psychologically to realize that he can't carry the weight of the whole world on his shoulders. And unrealistic. All any of us can do is keep swimming, doing our part to reach the shore. Thank you for having me.
A little while ago, our meeting started by being commended for our work and our being here for 250 years. We are more than our physical meeting house, and yet this building, indeed this space, is cherished by us. I'm going to cry. This is my home away from home. And if it weren't for the work of the members of the property committee of Mount Holly meeting over the years, we could have lost it to disrepair. Renovations have been many over the years, and so we honor the members of the property committee in the past, and especially those here with us today. We have a little take-home gift for you all, and I'll ask them to come up at the end and get their little take-home plaque, which we have one for the meeting house to post somewhere and one for them to take home. Recognition and appreciation of the Property Committee of Mount Holly Monthly Meeting, November 15th, 2025. It is with much gratitude and love that we, members of Mount Holly Monthly Meeting of the Religious Society of Friends, do formally recognize and appreciate those members of the Property Committee of Mount Holly Monthly Meeting this 15th day of November, 2025. We recognize all of the thought, planning, energy, and physical labor it has taken the various members of this committee over the last 250 years to improve and keep safe our treasured meeting house. We especially thank the work of this year's property committee, and I'm going to say this year, but they've been on I think All three of these people have been on the property committee for many years. Carl Blades. Carl, you want to come up? Zadra Allen Lafayette. And Bill Robbins. I always said I don't get on the property committee because this is way too much work. We especially thank them as they guided us in our geothermal project, which will allow our meeting house to be air-conditioned and more energy efficient. The production of a walking path with benches and signage is also a project much appreciated by the meeting. And there's a lot of other things they've done too. In gratitude and admiration, Mount Holly Monthly Meeting of the Religious Society of Friends. Hold this for me for a minute. There's a typo on here, so I'm sorry.
See, we're still not perfect.
Thank you for your work. This is going to go in the meeting house.